Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The Information Technology and General Services Committee will now come to order. We will take items 3 and 4 first, and then we will go back to item number 1.
Item number 3, City Attorney Report and Resolution relative to a request to destroy certain obsolete records from the Department of Public Works, Bureau of Sanitation, Financial Management Division for the period of January 1st, 1983 through June 30th, 2002. Item 4 is continued from May 15th or 19th, 2009. City Attorney Report and Resolution relative to a request to destroy certain obsolete records from the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, General Accounting Division for the period of July 1st, 1999 through September 17th, 2005.
Hello.
Todd Godowski from the City Clerk's Office. The sanitation records appear to be fairly routine. The request was prepared by the City Clerk's Office and approved by the Bureau of Sanitation and the City Attorney's Office. The records are all over 7 years old. We're here for the second time on the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment records. Since the last meeting, we have been in touch with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, and they have heard from the Controller's Office that the Controller is not interested in auditing these records because of their age.
And the Controller-elect as well, right?
Correct.
Any questions? No. Okay. Is there anybody here to speak on items 3 and 4 to this committee? Anybody here on items 3 and 4? I see no public comment cards filled out. Public comment is now closed. With that, we move to approve the City Attorney Report on item 3 and 4. Thank you. We now move to item number 1.
Item number 1, CIO Report relative to the city's 2008-2009 fourth construction projects and related matters.
Alma Gibson with the CIO's office. As part of our continued effort to provide financial oversight of the capital projects, our office is submitting to you the fourth construction projects report for fiscal year 08-09. It provides recommendations for funding adjustments related to the city's construction projects. And these financial adjustments consist primarily of reimbursements to city departments from general obligation bonds, CIP, and MICLA financings. Of the total $9.2 million of recommended in transfers and appropriations within this report, $5 million is recommended for appropriations to GSD to perform construction work on various projects. These projects include police stations, fire stations, and animal shelters, for example. It also includes $3.5 million of reprogramming of library bond project accounts within the CIEP, and also $610,000 of staff cost reimbursements for work that the ITA, BOE, and Public Works Accounting Office performed. Representatives for projects listed in these reports are available for any questions you may have. Also, upon approval of this report, we recommend that you submit it forthwith so that council can approve as soon as possible before the controller's deadline of encumbering and appropriating funds.
Okay. And all of the funds that you just described are all in one fashion or other a bond, form of bond fund?
Correct. For MICLA financing, that's correct.
Okay. When it comes to the post-construction work being conducted at the PAB, how much work needs to be done?
I'd like to have the program manager for this project be available.
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. Right now, we've appropriated a total of $550,000 for post-construction. That's based on a list of work provided by LAPD to date.
Was this budgeted, this $550,000, was it budgeted from the beginning of the project?
That's correct. That money is within the current PAB project budget.
Any questions on that? When it comes to the Northeast Valley Animal Shelter, what's the status of the work that's taking place there?
Again, the PM will respond to that.
This is Ramon Soto with the CAO's office. And that is work that has been completed. It was done by GSD, also wholly within the budget under Proposition F for the project. And as we indicated in the report, at the Northeast Valley Animal Shelter, there was some work done regarding concrete slab grading, installing a rock-based trench drain and rebarring, as well as covers for a training kennel. And if you have any specific questions about that work, we do have GSD staff here who could explain it. But in terms of the finances of it, it was fully within the budget for Prop F, and no new funds are required.
Now, if say you have a project like, say, an animal shelter, and GSD is going about their business, and you're having to look into, or you're doing your job where you're looking into whether or not things were complied with and things were done properly, what is the step that the CAO's office takes if, in fact, they find a discrepancy or something that they disagree with GSD about? What?
Up until now, that hasn't happened.
Ever?
In terms of, well, under Prop F at this particular project is what I can speak to. But typically,
I used an animal shelter generically as an example.
Yes.
But I'd just like to know, as an example, what does your office do when you do run into a discrepancy, you do run into something where your office says, wait a minute, GSD, you guys are not doing this properly, or that is not within the scope of your responsibility, or it didn't get done right, and people are complaining?
well, in the first instance, BOE is the program manager for this. So you would have the PMs in this case. They get different ways of hearing about any particular problems that need to get fixed. They might hear it from Animal Services, for example. We don't think this is right. As a part of that, the PM will need to determine is whether the work was done properly or improperly. Sometimes it's not until after you move in when you see that something may not be working the way it's supposed to be. So if there was work that was improperly done by the contractor, because in the case of Prop F projects, for the most part, we use private contractors to do the construction work. So if there was work that was improperly done, then the PM would go back to the contractor to have the fix done. If there was something unclear about that, at that time they would request a change order. There are standards for when change orders can and cannot happen, and when they reach a certain threshold, they need to go to the Board of Public Works. In the case of, like in this case, there was nothing that was out of spec, if you will. So we can't go to the contractor. So at that point, the PM would likely contact GSD and ask them to do certain work, repairs. They typically contact our office when something like that needs to occur, and we work with them. If there are any kind of policy issues, we would go to the appropriate Oversight Committee for approval. If there are not, if the work that needs to be covered exceeds the budget for that particular project, we would have to go to the Oversight Committee and then ultimately to the City Council for an appropriation. In this case, it doesn't need to go there because the work is fairly routine, and also it is within the budget for the project. I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Anything else you want to add?
Maria Cardenas with the CAO's office. What Ramon was describing is the process that we have, that we strive to achieve on all the projects that GSD does serves as a contractor, so that we can have the program manager from Bureau of Engineering approve the change orders when work is not done satisfactorily, when they cannot reach an agreement on a change order. The problem we have with GSD is that since they are city employees, then we do have the policy decision of what we do about making their, reimbursing their costs. In contracts that we have negotiations with the contractors for change orders. With GSD, that's a more difficult situation. When we have issues that are not resolved at the program manager level, it goes to the Administrative Oversight Committee. If it's not resolved at that level, then it goes to council.
So, You're like an arbitrator. You're kind of like in the middle, but you're not the decision maker about what, at the end of the day, is right or wrong if it continues to be a dispute.
Right, no, we have the work that we do, which would be to provide assistance on all the financial transactions, on adherence with the governance structure that each of our programs have, facilitating resolution of those issues, but not the only authority that the AOC has, administrative oversight committees have within the general obligation bond programs is clearly spelled out in the governance structure. So if it's within those parameters that council established in order to facilitate projects, we can do that. If it exceeds it, then we go back to the mayor and council.
At the new Metro Detention Center, ITA and GSD are conducting a $1.7 million technology and post-construction work. What's the process that LAPD, ITA, and DOE work together to meet these technology issues?
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. You're talking about for the Metro Detention Center? They would be working with ITA staff, and we have ITA staff included on the Prop Q project. And our PM here is here to answer any questions in terms of how they work out, what work needs to be done.
Well, in general, Vince Jones with the Bureau of Engineering. I'm the program manager for the Prop Q bond program. At the end of construction, we work with LAPD, Facilities Management Division, and they put together a scope of work for all work that's involved in post-construction activities. So that includes work that GSD does, that includes work that ITA does. And LAPD, they have a set scope of work. They know what kind of technology needs to go into the building. So they work with ITA and their ITD group to incorporate all of the technical aspects of a facility, and we work with LAPD to manage that.
So you're an engineer?
Yes.
And outside of the city of Los Angeles, what kind of experience have you had when it comes to these kinds of oversight projects?
Well, since my entire career basically has been with the city of Los Angeles, I have about 27 years of experience overall as a civil engineer and a program manager and a project manager. I've been in the Prop Q bond program for since 2002, so going on 7 years. I started out as project manager and now the program manager. So, and over, $600 million worth of projects that we've designed and delivered. So, if we understand the scope of work that LAPD wants to do in each facility, not just the Metro Detention Center, but the police stations, we make sure it's reasonable. We make sure it fits within the budget. We make sure that the funds that we spend are eligible for Prop Q funding, and we rely on the CAO's office for that assistance as well.
So if the police department wants to make a particular improvement to a particular facility or what have you, it may be their idea, but they have to go run it by you for you to say whether or not it makes any sense from a
Prop Q is a general obligation bond program, so there are certain restrictions on how funds can be used. So, of course, our office relies on Bureau of Engineering to make a call about whether or not the requested scope of work falls in line with that work. Now, with the Prop Q facilities, there was some value engineering that took place initially, so there was a conscious effort to pull out some of the work from contractors and give that to general services to do that work. So we have a lot of additional work being done by city forces as a result of that. So some of this work, including ITA work and GSD work, are not true add-ons. We have some unfinished rooms that need to be completed and that sort of work. With regards to technology, Q funds are limited. We can't purchase equipment, but however, Q funds can be used to put in the hardware necessary to do the installation, like conduits through walls.
But let me just also add that for the technology that goes into a facility, we have to rely on our client, which is LAPD. They understand the operations of a facility. If we needed some technical guidance or advice to assist them, we have consultants that started out doing the design for the facility in all disciplines. So we have architects and structural engineers and mechanical engineers and information technology engineers that provide consultant support for decisions that have to be made if we need help. I mean, again, we rely on LAPD. They understand how facilities work and operate, and they know what needs to go into the facilities. But if we need assistance, we have our consultants on board that would help us making decisions or helping us in design for whatever we needed.
Is there anybody here to speak on item number 1? On item number 1, I don't see any public comment cards on item number 1. With that, we'll close public comment on item number 1, and it's the committee approves the CIO report.
Thank you. Forthwith, please. Thank you.
We're now on item number 2.
Item number 2, motion, Perry Parks, relative to a proposed supplemental agreement to contract number C-113823 for the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust.
Okay. Is there any staff who has any information that they could report to us on this item?
Good afternoon. Neil Drucker, Public Works Engineering, Recreation and Cultural Facilities Program.
I'm David Moss, Bureau of Engineering, Recreational Cultural Facilities Program.
This is a routine matter. It's a requested extension to the Prop K grant agreement with the LA Neighborhood Land Trust. This is a lease of a city-owned property to turn it into a park. The Land Trust was awarded Prop K funds last year, in fact, over a year ago, and they were required to have a lease with the city by this October, or actually past October 2008. That did not happen, due in part to the change in leadership of the Land Trust. They have a new executive director now.
Who was the old executive director?
Sheila Berman. And we have been working with them and GSD to move this lease forward as quickly as possible. What we would like to do is give them till September, so just a few months, to get the lease executed. And then
Who's their executive director now?
it's David McNeil is the interim chief operating officer.
Okay.
And the amendment would also extend the time period for them to actually construct the project an additional year to June 26, 2011. So it would give them
Yes.
Okay.
26. So they will be in construction for 12 months?
That's correct, approximately 12
Prior to
months.
that, it's all agreements and designs and all that stuff?
Correct.
Okay. And who's going to be in charge of the project afterwards when it comes to the ongoing staffing, things of that nature, maintenance?
LA Neighborhood Land Trust is fully in charge. They operate and maintain the facility once it's complete.
Do they operate and maintain other facilities?
Yes, they've completed a number of city-related projects. A few of the Anna Bing parks are being operated and maintained by the Neighborhood Land Trust. We have met with them a number of times over the last 6 months due to some concerns, with regard to their ongoing maintenance funding. So that is, a continuing concern. We're trying to work with them, and we have assurances from Glenn Dake of their staff that they do have money to maintain this project.
Because it's my understanding that they love to partner with the city when it comes to creating facilities like this, but they tend to try to encourage the local community to get engaged and get involved in the maintenance.
Yeah, and that part is true. Yeah.
But the thing is, it's hard to maintain a concrete facility on volunteers.
Yeah, this isn't like a community farm or community garden,
Grass
exactly.
continues to grow, the facility has liability, things break, unless you have actual ability to make sure that a certain minimum maintenance occurs on an ongoing basis, it could cause problems for the city.
That's correct. And in fact, one of the delays here was and is the continuing discussions with the land trust to ensure that they really do have the financial and manpower capacity to operate and maintain this facility as well as other facilities we're working on with them fully during the, and Prop K requires a formal service and maintenance period. So we do actually have a grant agreement that includes a service component, and they're required to meet minimum standards of public health and safety, operational standards and maintenance standards, as well as serve a minimum number of people. Otherwise, the city does have the ability in the future to come back and either work with them to identify additional funds for them to do that, or in the worst case, if they can no longer operate it, take back the facility and operate it as a city facility.
Yeah, but we have a fundamental problem. We're having staffing issues on our current facilities. So it's kind of like the person who puts a gun to his own head and says, stop or I'll shoot.
Understood. I don't disagree with you.
So when it comes to the neighborhood land trust, when it comes to the dialogue that you and I are having, what it really gets down to is we have to trust them. No pun intended.
That's correct.
And if they fail, the consequence is that we take back the responsibility of maintaining a property that serves our constituents in our community and that is owned by us anyway.
That's
and
correct.
they just kind of go away. So the only thing that I think they lose is a little bit of pride and maybe a little bruise to their ego that they weren't able to continue to be a part of, making sure that there are these kinds of facilities for people to be utilizing, and their name is no longer associated with it.
That's correct, unfortunately. And in the future, I think we as a city will be less likely in the same situation when they come to us for a grant to grant that grant because of the concern we'll have that they haven't been able to do it on this project, for example.
Maybe they're just trying to fool us into partnering with them on all kinds of projects, and then later on they just kind of walk away and say, wow, gosh, we were part of creating 15, 20, 30 parks, pocket parks or what have you in the city of Los Angeles, and we did a wonderful thing, and we don't even have to have any responsibility for the ongoing, maintenance of them.
I hope that's not the case, but it's certainly a possibility in the
Well, you
future.
mentioned earlier that we have some concerns about them.
That's correct, yes. We have met with them on another project, in fact, one in your own district, that they've come to us and said they're going to have a difficult time operating and maintaining it.
Yeah, but I hate to use this as an example, but my fine colleague here is the chair of the Budget Committee. If for some reason the council can't get a handle on the budget, by changing the chairman of the Budget Committee doesn't solve the problem. That'd be a bad idea, I think, but it doesn't solve the problem. The problem still is dollars and cents on the budget, imbalance or whatever our problem is. So the fact that they changed from Sheila Berman
That's
to
right.
David McNeil doesn't help me feel more comfortable.
One thing we
Why
can...
should you feel more comfortable?
Well, I don't feel more comfortable just because of the change. I feel more comfortable based on a series of meetings where they've reported to us that they have adequate funds. Now, one thing we can do, and we have done in the past in similar situations, is request that they formally provide us with a list of all their funding sources, the amounts, and how they... That we have not formally done on this
I
project.
think because we have concern and a history with them, we need to do that.
Understood. We can certainly do that,
So
sir.
this committee is instructing you to do that, to make sure that you get formal documentation, not something where they give you something on their letterhead saying, we have about $600,000 in our account, and our overhead annually is $200,000 for our administration, so you can assume that we have $400,000 sitting there to maintain these parks that we have partnerships with.
Understood. Yeah, we'll get information that
They have to
is
give
credible.
us documentation that is more official than that, such as documentation that they submit as a 501c3, I'm assuming they are,
That's
or
right.
whatever status they are. They have to do returns every year. They need to give us something showing us where they have their money how much money they have. And then more importantly, they need to also let us know at least their opinion rolling forward as to whether or not their sources of funds are continuing or not.
Okay, understood. We'll set that meeting up with Mr. McNeil and his staff as soon as possible.
I don't understand why we're being so nice to people who have given us concerns. And the reason why I'm spending so much time on this is because I have a park that I partnered with them in Panama City on. And sure enough, within about 30 days, people were saying, hey, it's not being maintained very well. I mean, it's not falling apart, thank God, but it's not being maintained even to the minimum standards that they expected and told us they would, and that we expected, or that the community expected.
Okay.
And you can't blame the community if not enough people volunteer, because they're not the ones that were the impetus for it. Yes, they participated, but it was the Land Trust Organization and the City of Los Angeles that actually made it happen. Any questions?
Yes, is this the same David McNeil from the Baldwin Hills Conservancy?
Yes, it is.
And then one other thing is Mr. Gordon has asked about the funding. I think at least for the last 4 or 5 years, the city has a line item assistance to them. It's not a lot of money, particularly, well, it's a lot of money today. When we had money, it wasn't a lot of money. But, you know, the thing is, I would think that they would show that along with what we were told on going to that other grants and other funding coming in. But I think we averaged maybe over the last 4 or 5 years, $100,000 each year, and I think we cut it down this year. So that was another, in the sense of commitment that the city made in their behalf based on what we thought they were doing a positive job in the community.
Okay, yeah, we'll ensure that we look at that as well.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So anybody here to speak on item number 2? We're on item number 2. I see no public comment cards filled out for item number 2. Therefore, item number 2, public comment is now closed. So what we'll do is instruct the who is better to get that information, GSD or Parks?
We'll go ahead and get that information.
Okay, so concurrently, both departments will work together to get that information from this third-party neighborhood land trust. And we'll move the item forward, but you'll report back to this committee on the documentation. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
That item is adopted. We now move to item number 5.
Item number 5 is continued from April 7th and April 21st, 2009. CEO report in response to motion, Zion Smith, relative to directing the CEO with the assistance of the Information Technology Agency, Los Angeles Fire Department, and Los Angeles Police Department to report on correcting funding deficiencies in the Communication Services Division.
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Jacob Wexler with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. The Zion Smith motion before you identified administrative flaws that hampered ITA's ability to complete communication equipment installations and to place in fire vehicles in a timely fashion. Specifically noted at the time of the motion, there were 34 police vehicles that were awaiting installations over at Piper Tech, and raised concerns about the inefficiency of that situation. Back in April, this committee requested that the CIO report back addressing a number of things, including the ITA budget for this purpose, for these installations, an explanation of the billing process that was identified in the motion as being flawed, updated status of the vehicles that were awaiting installations, and any solutions that we could come up with to address these delays on an ongoing basis. I guess I start by talking about the police department. For the police department, the ITA is budgeted directly to fund one staff person, and then $137,000 in hiring hall salaries for hiring hall staff to conduct these installations. That was the case this year, and that's the proposed budget for 2009-2010 as well. This year in 8-9, the hiring hall salaries were inadequate, and there was deficit in that account, which was made up by transferring funds from other surpluses and other ITA accounts. The projection for 2009-10 is that there will be fewer installations, and there will be a need for lower resources. And Based on the projections that were presented by the department, we believe that the budget should be adequate in 2009-2010 without any further deficits. The major cause for the delays of the 34 vehicles that were over at Piper Tech was that there was a lack of equipment that needed to be installed into these vehicles. So the required equipment was not available, so the cars were awaiting the equipment for those installations to occur. The process is that the police department is responsible for purchasing the equipment that needs to go into the vehicles or for providing the equipment. Some of it is harvested from vehicles that are no longer in service. We put into replacement vehicles as well. There was a shortage of equipment that was primarily due to the fact that the number of vehicles within the police department's fleet that was receiving the communications equipment expanded. There are more types of vehicles that receive the equipment, so the full range of the vehicles that required the equipment had increased, not because there's more black and white necessarily, because the newer vehicles did come with equipment, but because other types of vehicles were included in the types that received that kind of equipment. In the short term, the delays have been addressed by identifying available equipment that was in use elsewhere and moving those into the cars that were awaiting installations. But that does not address the long-term need for equipment. There's a shortage of equipment. The ideal industry standard would be that there would be constantly a 10% spare store of equipment that would be available to put 10% more than the cars that need the equipment. And so the recommendation is that the police department go forward and request funding to purchase that equipment using Proposition M funds, which is used for 911 services. And we believe that it's eligible to be used for this purpose. It was used in the past to purchase equipment for new vehicles. That would have to be approved by the steering committee that oversees those funds. So that's for the police installations. The police department is already in the process of developing a request to request funds to purchase the additional, essentially computers, but the equipment is required. For the fire department, ITA is funded through the fire department's funding that they receive for their fleet includes an allotment or a portion to pay for the installations that ITA does as well. The approximately $660,000 is going to be used in 2008-9, and we anticipate that the same amount will be used in 2009-10 for that purpose. And there is adequate funding available in MICLA for the installations, and there was adequate funding this year. However, the authority to spend the money has to be transferred from fire to ITA during the course of the fiscal year. And the fire department reviews the invoices that are submitted by ITA, the CIO reviews them, and ultimately they require council approval because of the amounts. And we've done those transfers during 2008-2009 through our financial status reports. Because of the timing of the financial status reports, we've sort of, on occasion, been right up against solvency and, come close to having a cash flow problem for the hiring hall account because of, delays in getting the reports out. And, we do big amounts of transfers and then we runs out by the time we get to the next financial status report. So it's recommended that in 2009-2010, in the first financial status report, we essentially transfer the authority for the full year's spending in the first report, and then as the year goes on, we authorize the cash to be transferred to ITA upon review by fire department and CAO. If the council gives the authority in the beginning of the year, there will not be need for the subsequent transfers approved through the financial status reports, and we'll be able to get the cash flow flowing more quickly and avoid the delays in transfers that we experienced this year. Available for any questions.
In the CIO report, it mentions that ITA might have savings in its 0809 contractual services account to fund technology enhancements. Why should ITA foot the bill?
Well, that was in meetings that we had during the interim period in the last month or so, we had discussions, and one of the issues that was identified was that the system through which both ITA and the police department track the inventories of their vehicles they use the same system, but they don't communicate with each other. In those meetings, ITA, they identified this problem, the police department identified this problem, and there are discussions that it needed to be addressed, that it would be nice to try to address it, and ITA say we probably can find some money to address that. So it wasn't so much a question of who should, as that they seem to think they would be able to try to address that, identify funds to address that. Having said that, that was not based on actually getting an estimate from the contractor at that time. So until we know what the cost is, we don't actually know that they do have adequate surpluses to address that. But that was the plan, was that they would look into that, and that was sort of their offer to do that.
Well, I'm recommending to ITA that they withdraw that offer because their department has been hit really hard, and being that their department is the purview of this committee, specifically the fire department, police department, these other departments are not the purview of this committee. So I don't know what their budgets are like. I think they didn't do too bad, did they? They did pretty good. But ITA just got hit on just this past Friday, even after the budget process, with some more cuts, recommended cuts. So I'm recommending to ITA that thank you very much for your generosity of effort back when you could try to be generous, but I recommend that you do not allow yourself to be expected to foot that bill. I'm sure there are other appropriate uses for those funds now that we're asking you to stretch even thinner and thinner every day. I've been involved in government ITA issues longer than I care to, and it's been about 12 years now. And one of the biggest problems that we have with government today is that there's very little respect for the ongoing responsibilities and the growing responsibilities the ITA has, departments have in all levels, public and private. And it's in people's ignorance that they feel that those departments can do with less, when in reality, we don't realize how many more burdens we're laying on them every single day, and how much we depend on them. When they say that a system can crash, we just take it as, that couldn't happen. Oh, yes, it can. If you don't have proper support, if you don't have the proper funding for upgrades and things of that nature, real bad things happen. And in this case, it could affect public safety as well, if they're not afforded the ability to do their jobs or given the funds to do it. Any other questions?
Yeah. One concern I have is that during the recent budget hearings, we identified that MICLA money had somewhat been used differently than it was initially created. And we started off looking at it as a source for, I guess, mortar and bricks and buildings, and only 10 or 12, 15% was used for these kinds of issues. Now we find that 80+% of MICLA is spent on equipment and services that are 5 years or less, and only 20% on its initial usage. We've asked the CAO to go back and reconfigure and begin to look at the issue of MICLA funds going more closely related to its initial intent. We realize it's going to take a time to wean us off of that credit card, but our real issue is if these funds or these bonds have not been let, that in the future, we're going to be a lot more stringent on looking at what we use it for, and to get back to what the original intent. One of the concerns that came up during the budget hearings is we found out in just 1 year, we increased our debt over 23%, primarily MICLA money. And, we were buying stuff that incrementally looked okay, but when you collectively put it into the budget, you found it was one of the major issues of the bonding agencies that reflected that we should be on the watch list because our debt increased, our liabilities were going up, and our revenue was going down. So the issue of looking towards MICLA for 09-10 may not be a reality. And again, we're not going to be able to cut everything off at one time, but we did ask the CAO to create ability to get out of that imbalance of that 80-20, where it used to be 80-20 the reverse, but that we should not be using that credit card for operational expense of these types. And again, it's a report back, and again, we realize it's not going to happen overnight, but certainly we're going to start weaning ourselves off of those type of expenditures.
Okay.
All right. Is anybody here to speak on item number 5? We are on item number 5. I do not see any public comment cards filled out on
Did we
item
give you
number 5.
clarity on, or did we just rip up your report and leave this in there?
No, I mean, probably, well, you know, that's okay, that's your prerogative. It's the fire vehicles that are MICLA funded, and anything that is involved with delivering the vehicles is considered part of it. But I think what you're saying is even things like vehicles, which don't last for 30 years.
The issue is we found
Right.
we've been buying vehicles for the last decade or so on MICLA. We've been doing a lot of stuff, and it just kind of is a flow. Everybody says, well, just stick it in MICLA, and you're paying for stuff over 10 years or 20 years for stuff you should be paying out of the general fund. And it getting to the point now where, and again, we used to look at just where we were on our debt policy. We weren't approaching the max, so everybody felt comfortable.
Right.
But then when we analyzed what we were spending it for, I don't think you could make a good case for spending on equipment items, operational expenses, cars, things like that on a credit card,
Right.
as opposed to what the original intent was, much larger purchases.
I'm going to assume that whoever's working on the report back that you're referring to
Yes.
will address
That's right.
that type of answer.
Again,
So-
we clearly know with the amount of money that's already been spent, that this is not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take some time to move in that direction. I just wanted to forewarn you that that's a direction they were given when I saw the 9-10 timeline.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So with those caveats, now that public comment has been closed in this committee will approve the CIO report. Thank you. We now move to item number 6, the last item scheduled for today's agenda.
Item number 6, City Clerk Report relative to fiscal year 2007-2008 annual expenditures for the Council District Community Services Fund of the General City Purposes Budget.
Good afternoon, Glenn Robison with the City Clerk. I'm joined by Avak Sarafian, our General City Purposes Analyst. Before you today is the annual report for the 2007-2008 fiscal year for all of the expenditures for the General City Purposes Council District Community Services account. Each council office gets $100,000 at the beginning of the year, and this report indicates all of those expenditures during the year. We are required by ordinance to report that on an annual basis. Your end-of-year report was submitted to you, to each office individually in September for your review, and this is the final report that goes through before council.
Are there any procedural changes or anything like that that has happened in the last 12 months that are different than previous years?
No, the procedures are generally intact and the same that we have been carrying on for some time. In the following fiscal year, I believe that the proposed budget is going to decrease the amount that each council office will get. I think it's from 100,000 to 90,000.
10%.
Yeah, 10% cut.
Let me just ask one question.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to figure this out. How do you distinguish your community services funds from your GCP on the report? Is that the allocations of what they're spent for, such as going out for events and activities as opposed to going out to organizations?
Correct. In the GCP, there are probably 50 different line items. One of those line items is the Council District Community Services account. And within that account, there are the 15 council districts. And we have sub-accounts within that, and we track every allocation that each office makes. And then in addition to that, within the GCP are those other larger line items that can indicate allocations to individual organizations. And then you, as an individual council member, can also allocate funds to those organizations too, if you would like, or to other organizations that provide community services within your district.
But on these reports, there's nothing that distinguishes a community service fund versus the GCP. You can't just look at the item with an asterisk and say, this is GCP versus community service.
All of the community services line item is a line item within the GCP budget.
Mm-hmm.
So all community service items in this report are from GCP. It's like GCP is the fund.
So this is different than our community benefit or those separate funds?
That is correct. Those two are different funds. GCP and the council, the benefits trust fund are different.
Yeah. What is it? One of them is monitored by CLA and the other one's monitored by the clerk, city clerk?
Both are monitored by the city clerk, both the benefits trust fund and GCP.
And they're just reported, they're reported separately.
Okay. But on the benefits fund, you can get funds from outside of the city plus use some of your own city funds?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. One thing, I think on your monthly report that you put together, you always recommend that these be put on your website so that people be aware of them. Is there any difference in the fact that this is a year in that we would not make that same recommendation? Or do we expect that they've already put these on based on the monthly report?
There is no difference. It is a recommendation from a council policy that each office does so. And so that recommendation is appropriate for, however, the annual report is posted on the council file management system, so this whole report will be available electronically through the CFMS.
But if council officers are following your request on a monthly basis, this should have been posted a year ago when they got the monthly reports.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, I just asked if this, we can add to the committee report that recommendation of council policy that this report should be posted on individual councils' websites for community review.
Okay. Good. More disclosure is always good. Okay. With that, do we have anybody who wants to speak on item number 6? This council committee hearing is on item number 6. I do not see any public comment cards filled out on item number 6. Therefore, public comment on item number 6 is now closed. With that, the committee will note and file the city clerk report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are now open for general public comment. Anybody have any general public comment for this committee? Seeing and hearing no one come forward and seeing no public comment cards for general public comment to this committee, general public comment is now closed. This committee is now adjourned.